South Africa has approached the International Court of Justice to request an interim measure to prevent Israel from committing acts of potential genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. This is the biggest story right now of a conflict that has transfixed the world's attention for the last 4 months. And how the ICJ rules in this case may fundamentally affect how the war between Hamas and Israel unfolds in the coming months and years. And somehow South Africa is right in the middle of the whole thing. So let's talk about it. What are the charges? What is South Africa's history with Palestine and Israel? What is the International Court of Justice? And what might happen if the ICJ agrees with South Africa that Israel has exhibited genocidal intent and orders Israel to stop its activities in Gaza? This is the issue with South Africa's case against Israel over genocidal intent. This is the issue with Dan Corder. Because South Africa is a movie, welcome to the watch party. If you want to find us in all the other places, just have a look at the banners. Let's get into it. So where are we now? If you're watching this on day of publication, 15 Jan, the courts started hearing this case last Thursday and Friday, the 11th and 12th of January 2024. The proceedings are ongoing. But what has led us to this point? On the 7th of October 2023, Hamas operatives entered Israeli-controlled territory and brutally killed more than 1,000 Israeli Jewish people and took hundreds more hostage. Since the 7th of October, Hamas and the IDF, that's Israel's defense force, have been at war. And the war has largely taken place in Palestine, in Gaza. The IDF has mounted a ground invasion of Gaza and sent tanks and troops into the streets. They have bombed large parts of Gaza, and IDF actions have killed more than 20,000 Palestinians. Thousands of the Palestinians killed are children. More than half of those dead are civilians. The IDF controls access into and out of Gaza, and IDF actions have caused the collapse of clean water access in Gaza, the collapse of food resources in Gaza, the end of reliable electricity, energy in Gaza, and the destruction of many healthcare facilities for Palestinians. The IDF has also severely limited aid organizations' ability to get food aid and parcels and trucks of essential resources into Gaza for Palestinians, which means that right now, millions of Palestinians in Gaza face an immediate threat of starvation. Those are not controversial facts. Nobody from any side of this war, this conflict, no one from any perspective disputes those facts. That is the reality. And it is that exact reality which has led South Africa to bring this case before the International Court of Justice. The South African case aims to prove that Israel has shown genocidal intent, which means the intention, the plan, the move towards committing genocidal acts against Palestinians. And South Africa is seeking that the International Court of Justice orders Israel to stop its activities in the Gaza Strip against Palestinians. So what is the ICJ, and why is South Africa, of all countries, what are they doing here? After the Second World War, countries everywhere got together to try and figure out a system to stop a war like that from ever happening again. And in particular, to stop any chance that something as terrible as the Holocaust against Jewish people ever happened again. And what they came up with was the United Nations, an overseeing body of hopefully all of the countries in the world that would strengthen relations between different countries and organize communal efforts to try and make the world a better place. But the UN did need some courts to settle disputes and pursue justice. And the two most significant ones that they made were the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and the ICJ. Now, you probably know about the ICC. It's way more famous. They go against people, or sometimes small groups of people, who seem to have committed crimes already. But the ICJ's job is to settle disputes between countries, between nations, almost overwhelmingly between member nations of the UN who have come into disagreement that could end up in conflict. The ICJ has no power in and of itself. They don't have an army, they don't have a police force. But ideally, the way this is supposed to happen is once the ICJ makes a ruling on a case, the member states of the United Nations exert pressure, political pressure, social, sometimes even economic, to get the states involved in the case to comply with the ICJ's ruling. So I'm sure you're wondering, what is South Africa doing here? Well, South Africa has a very unique relationship with the Middle East, and in particular, Israel and Palestine. What you need to know is that Israel was one of the most hardcore supporters of and alliance partners with the apartheid government throughout apartheid, to the point where Israel even had nuclear cooperation agreements with apartheid South Africa. And Palestine always stood with the ANC, Umkhonto we Sizwe, and the struggle for freedom by South Africans of color against apartheid oppression. And South Africa, and particularly the ANC, has never forgotten that. And there is one other reason why they are so tightly bound. It's because South Africans see in Israel's treatment of Palestinians plenty of what we saw in apartheid, of white oppression over the black majority. So that's why South Africa has brought this case. That's why the South African government formed what I need you to know is like the Avengers of the South African legal community. Genuinely, the South African legal minds involved in this case are world-renowned and epically good at their jobs, including the likes of Dila Hassim and Tebeka Tobi. They really know what they're doing. And they created an 84-page legal argument that is being presented in front of the ICJ. I'm going to do some reading here because you need to hear the exact wording. It's very important. South Africa has accused Israel of committing genocide in violation with the 1948 Genocide Convention. South Africa is arguing that Israel has already committed genocidal acts. Senior counsel Adila Hassim highlighted at least 4 parts of the Genocide Convention that South Africa is arguing Israel has contravened. They're contained in Article 2, which says, in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intention to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. And then she described Article 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D. 2A is the killing of members of a group. 2B is causing serious bodily harm or mental harm to members of the group. 2C is deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And 2D is imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And Hassim was clear that South Africa believes that they only need to prove that Israel has contravened one of these in order to win the case. But South Africa is very confident that they can prove multiple or all of them. And that's not all, because then senior counsel Tembeka Tobi took the stand, and in his presentation, he argued that Israel has shown genocidal intent. And South Africa believes that even if they only prove genocidal intent, that is also enough to win the case. And the case that South Africa has put together in this 84-page document is incredibly upsetting, incredibly hard to read. Particularly a group of pages, a passage towards the end of the document, which amasses South Africa's evidence to support their case. South Africa says that the scope of the Israeli military's operations, its indiscriminate bombings, its execution of civilians, its blockade of food, water, medicine, fuel, shelter, and other humanitarian assistance are proof of South Africa's claims of genocide. And those actions have pushed the Gaza Strip and the millions of Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip to the brink of famine. And the attempts to destroy a group of people go beyond killings and destruction of essential services. South Africa claims that Israel is committing other violations of international law in the Gaza Strip, including launching an assault on Palestinian culture by attacking sites of religion, education, art, science, historic monuments, hospitals, and places where the sick and wounded are collected. And they go even further. They quote Israeli leaders, including Israel's ultimate leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, saying things that seem to clearly incite violence, incite genocidal acts against Palestinians. They have tons of quotes from powerful Israelis in government and in society saying that they want to destroy Palestine and get rid of the Palestinians altogether. In just one example, Israel's leader Benjamin Netanyahu compares the Palestinians to the Amalek, who are a biblical nation that God instructed the Israelites to destroy. The Bible verse says, "Now go and smite Amalek, kill both man and woman, infant." And South Africa says that all of this evidence, plus the fact that the Israeli government has not disciplined, punished, or prevented Israeli government officials and other prominent societal leaders from saying things that incite genocide, saying things that show a desire to destroy Palestine and drive the Palestinians away. The fact that they haven't taken measures against those kinds of utterances is a further piece of evidence to show that Israel intends to commit genocide, has genocidal intent, and clearly the capacity to do it. South Africa is hoping that the ICJ upholds their case and orders Israel to stop all activities against Palestinians in Gaza. Here's the problem with that, though. Unfortunately, the ICJ has no army, has no police force, which means that it requires the UN, the broader international community, to rally behind its decisions to enforce any of its rulings. And the United States of America is on the UN Security Council. It's one of the 5 nations which has a veto power to stop anything that the UN tries to do if it chooses to. And the United States of America is Israel's biggest, most ardent and hardcore supporter. And the United States, with the Biden administration, has stood by Israel no matter what ever since this war began 4 months ago. In fact, Joe Biden's administration is even bypassing their own parliamentary system, their own Congress, to continue to send hundreds of millions of dollars in specifically military aid and munitions to Israel. And a number of times in the last few weeks, the United States has specifically said that they have seen no evidence at all of genocidal acts committed by the IDF and Israel against Palestinians in Gaza. None. If the ICJ does make a ruling in support of South Africa's case and Israel continues to behave the way that they've been behaving, then what's supposed to happen is the aggrieved party, South Africa in this instance, goes to the UN to appeal to try and get countries to force Israel in this case to change, but the US will veto and block any such potential. And this is not remarkable at all. In 2022, Ukraine took Russia to the ICJ to get the ICJ to tell Russia to stop invading and attacking Ukraine. And the ICJ made the ruling and Russia ignored it, and Russia vetoes anything against it at the UN Security Council level. So no one's expecting the ICJ ruling to affect Israel's operations immediately. So then you're probably thinking, what's the point of all this? Why have they brought a case at all? It's not going to achieve anything concrete. And that's where I need to tell you that Israel is extremely worried about this court case. In the last week or two, Israeli spokespeople have come out and lambasted South Africa, accusing them of being viciously anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, and pro-Hamas and Hamas supportive by taking this case to the ICJ. They're doing everything they can to try and besmirch South Africa's reputation as this case unfolds. The reason why they are so worried about the optics of this case is because of how powerful the word genocide is. Because if the ICJ rules that Israel has genocidal intent, then Israel will become the country that is committing genocide, or at the very least intends to, wants to, designs and plans to commit genocide against Palestine and the people of Gaza. Because in this moment, the internet is so vast and social media is so enormous, far beyond the ability of any individual or small group of politicians or business leaders to control, that word, that label will spread and be cemented and understood by the hundreds of millions, billions of people who have expressed solidarity with the plight of Palestinians and condemned the tragedy taking place in Palestine right now and called on their own political leaders to push for ceasefire to stop what is currently happening. And Israel understands what a disaster that label will be if South Africa's case is upheld in a ruling by the ICJ. This is The Issue with Dan Corder. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, you can get deeper analysis of every single episode that we put out on all the podcast streamers. And if you enjoyed this or found this in any way useful, we'd so appreciate if you popped us a subscribe and maybe a like and told your friends or your dads or whoever else you think might enjoy this. And we'll see you for the next episode later this week.